This time we're going to work on moving around some code and getting colliders up. So first, the player.cs code is really just being used to instantiate a player. So I think it's going to be better to remove that and add it to the setup. So we'll say the last thing it does is set up the player, which is going to be a game object. Call it the player. Change some of this. Going to check to see if it's null on awake and then set a value. I think in Unity we're calling it player. There's that. We're going to instantiate it. We're going to add a component to it. Using this. Okay. Move over the rigid body code. Got some errors coming up. Trying to figure out what's causing them. Was it? Okay. We make that function. Have that go in here. Rigid body. Instantiate it, add the rigid body, do some rigid body controls, and then we move this to the end. So we set up the platform, then we set up the targets, then we add a player. And this no longer has to do anything. We want to make sure that our prefab has a collider on it. So we're going back to our resources folder and going to our target. We can see the collider right now because I have gizmos turned on. And we can look at the collider over here attached to the top level component. If you don't have one, go to add component and then capsule collider. Once you have it, if you press this button, it gives you little handles and you can adjust it, or you can type the scale and center into the script. Now we want to take and clean this up a little and set it up to actually start the experiment task, which is to move through the targets. So we have this target collection. Let's go down to set targets, and as we're making them, let's add them. And since they're already ordered from our work earlier, it'll be pretty easy to use that same order to trigger which ones are lighting up. We'll probably use colors to let people know which one to go to, and maybe use sounds once they get in and out of colliders. Okay, so we have that. Now we probably want a game manager that will manage these targets, and I don't think I want it in the setup. So I'm going to go to our scripts and just call it experiment manager. Load that. Namespace, as we have been doing, tilt fits. All right, and importantly, this is going to need that list of game objects, and these are going to be the targets. Let's call it target collection for consistency, and go back over here to setup. We'll get rid of the fits target script and the player for now. So we have this target collection, perfect. We're going to add another public function, and it's going to, or another public variable, and it's going to be that manager. And then once the setup's done, we can hand it over to the manager, and the manager can run the experiment. So we'll do a public experiment manager, just call it experiment manager. Go back over here. Just call that main for now. And we'll go to add the experiment manager. And up here we'll have it. On the setup, if we don't have an experiment manager, we probably want to add one. So if is null, then we want to get the game object this is attached to, add a component. That component will be a manager. Great, and then we just set it to that. It's going to be that game object. Perfect. Go back to the manager. We'll make this a public setup dot targets. Whoops. Equals the target collection we have. Great. And then we'll have some sort of function that we call manually. Let's start a trial. Okay, let's just see if the handoff works. Yeah, it looks good. Got main has this manager has this target collection. They're the ones we want and the order we want. So now we have to decide what we want the targets to actually do. For the analysis, we don't exactly need to know about the colliders at this point. So we might change the target, and then instead of the target script, to have some functions for controlling its material and its active state, and then go over to the setup, and instead of passing around the game objects, we can pass around the target scripts. So I'm going to start making that change. Then over here, that's fine. That works there. And then down here, Already looking up that fits target. So we'll just add that there. All right, what do we need to know about a target? We probably need to know which target it is. So we'll give it an int and call it target number. We'll set it to -1 for validation. Once we go over here, we'll say that the dot target number is equal to I plus 1. Now what? We probably want 3 materials. We want the material, its base material, the material that it is when it is activated as the next target, the material it is when it's been hit, and then that might change depending on how it was hit. So let's go ahead and add another couple of materials, and we'll just call this one is next target. And then we can have a private material that's its base material. The base mat can be set for itself. We also want align the rendering component for this. So let's do a private renderer, and we'll call it renderer. On awake, we're going to want to find that renderer. So if the renderer is null, which it's going to be, actually, if try get component renderer, then we're going to do some stuff. Out renderer. If not, so we're going to just log it as an error. We'll add the name of the object this is attached to. Now we know it has a renderer, or at least that it should. So let's set the base material. Base mat equals renderer dot material. And then let's add some functions. Public is, well, actually we could probably do this with a bool. Just cleaning up this top area. All right, so we want a public bool, and we'll call it is next, and it's going to be set to false. Right now we don't know if it's the next target. We're gonna change that a little bit. We'll open it up and then write a get and a set. And we'll close it. Perfect. We'll use a private bool. We'll just call it underscore is next and set it to false, and then return is next set equals is next or value. Now we are writing our own getter and setter because we want to have this change the material on is next and maybe do some other things. So let's go ahead and set that up. So if for setting it to true, we want the renderer dot material to equal is next target. And if not, then we want it to be the base mat. I'm going to rename this. So we have some errors saying we don't have a renderer, which we do have. But it's not on the parent object. It's on the cylinder object. Get rid of that collider. We also got rid of the other colliders. We're going to start with just one at a time for simplicity. Okay, so here's the collider. Here's the renderer. So we have to get first child of target. Okay, so that's going to be transform dot get child 0 dot try to get component. It wants, there we go. What's that look like? Great, no errors. Everything's moving. We're still triggering the target calls, but now that there's only one collider, it's just hollering out the target that was passed through. We're going to set up some communication now between the targets and the manager. So to do that, we're going to add a delegate or an event to the target, and then we're going to subscribe to that in the manager. So public delegate on target. Let's just say on target exit. And then we're going to do a public static event. We're going to call that the same thing. It's going to be a type of on target exit. We're going to call it on target exit. I'm going to go ahead and capitalize these and then call that lowercase on target exit. Perfect. Now we have these and they're not getting triggered yet. So we're going to look at the trigger exit function. So on trigger exit, we want to do something. And right now that something's just going to be to call our event. The event manager is going to subscribe and unsubscribe to that. So on enable, we want to do something. And then again on disable. And what we want to do is take a reference to fits target. Let's set up a we're going to set up a void to catch the event first. Target exited. Perfect. Fits target dot on target exit. We're going to subscribe our target exited function. Now we want to make sure that we remove that when this item's disabled. And we'll just log that it's working. And move from there. Let's try it out. Exited, that worked. And exited. We go over to 7. Perfect. Now to make it a little more functional, if is next, we want to do something, which is that. Otherwise we don't. And this will keep it from getting called when we don't want it. And now we're going to take the experiment manager and say, let's just set up an int. We'll call it the target index. We'll set it to 0. We'll probably make a method to deal with that, but for now we'll just handle it this way. So on start trial, we want to take target collection and get the item at the index, target index. We want to is next equals true. This should set the material and set it to true. Now when we exit it, we want to take and say it equals false. And then we want to increment our index, and then we want to take and do the next one is true. Let's go back over here. We're going to be missing the next target mat. I'm going to go over to materials. Just going to duplicate the wall. Target mat. Let's make it something bright. Perfect. It's target, and we want target mat. We didn't want to do it in the script though. We want to do it at the prefab level. Going over here. That's what we're looking for. All right. Start it and see what happens so far. Now the first one should be active. It was not. See what's going on. Set up. Got our, here we go. There we go. So we never started the trial. This should give us what we're looking for. Great. One is pink. Go through there. 2 is pink. 3. Now we have the targets highlighting in order. We're going to work on some better materials next. Now we're going to try to take this player, this material. We aren't going to set it to anything else. We'll go down and in update, we'll say if it's next, we want to execute some code, and we'll update the color as the player object gets closer. And to get the player object, we're going to make a private game object player, and we're just going to grab something with the player tag. We have the isTargetMat, so we're going to say new material, and we're going to use the isNextTargetMat as the constructor. And then down here, we're going to start manipulating the color of that. We're going to try to do it based on the distance from the player. So renderer dot color is equal to dot lerp. We want to move between two colors, and let's call it color dot red, color dot green, and then distance, where float distance is going to be the percentage of red or green that we want. So we have our distance, and we need to set it equal to the distance from the player to the target. But the center of the player is above the platform and thus above the target by half of its height, because it's a sphere and the transform position is the center. So we're also going to make a vector 3, and we're going to call it level with player, and we'll use that to move the platform's point that we're measuring distance from up to the height of the center of the player. So transform.position for the platform's position or the target's position, then player.transform.position, actually local scale. And since we know it's uniformly scaled, just going to grab it and divide it by 2. We can grab any of the points, and then we're going to take a vector 3 up and multiply that by it. So we move so we're finding a point that's half of the height of the player, and we're moving it up. Now distance can be the actual distance between our player and that point. So we want vector 3 dot distance to grab the distance, and that's going to be the distance between the target, but the level target, and the player. And now we can set the color change to that distance, and we can test it. As we get closer, it's turning green, and then once we exit the collider, it goes back to red. So the next thing we want to do is keep the max. And also on our list are to add some clamps for different distances. So we're going to make a private let's call it a float that's the closest point that we come into, or the smallest distance. And we'll set it equal to something incredibly unlikely. Now down here, we'll add a if distance is less than that smallest distance. we will change the render material color. And then we'll also set the smallest distance to the distance. And this should keep it from changing back to red as we get further away. Okay, there's green. Exit it. We should be, so one of the issues that we're seeing now is that the next target doesn't actually light up until the collider's exited. We might want to change that to collider entrance to make sure that the next one's always lighting up before, because right now we don't really know where we want to go next till we start moving towards it. So we're going to, we have on collider exit, we're doing this, but we can change that to on collider enter. And test that out. Now we'll have to change the code a little bit to let that work with the colors that we're using. The way I think I'm going to approach this is we should have a on trigger enter and an on trigger exit function. And then on exit, we can turn off the tracking on this target, and on enter, we can update to the next target. So on exit, we're going to do something. Up here, we're going to make one more set of events, and we'll call it on target enter. And then we'll keep that for the exit, and on target enter we'll say to trigger on target enter. Go over to our manager and we can subscribe to it. We'll make a target enter event first, or like a handler. And now we can subscribe to it. And I'm going to just move it so that the enter is above the exit. Now let's fix these really quick. So these are going to be on target entered. I'm going to go ahead and delete the code for entered and for exited. And now we need to figure out how we want to trigger the spheres. I think first, instead of saying is next, I'm going to call it is active. And we'll rename this to is active. Now back over to the manager script. We want to add two new functions that tell us whether we have a next target and whether we have a previous target. So we know what to do when we encounter these events. They're going to be bools. So private bool as previous target and a private bool that is has next target. Inside of these, we're going to say if the current target the target index is greater than or equal to 1, it has a previous target, so we can return true. Otherwise, we'll return false. And then down here, we'll say if the target index is less than the count of targets, less 1, then we want to return true. There is one. And if it's not, then we want to return false. I'm going to change target index to current target index. Okay, now we can deal with our entered and exit events. So on entered, we want to say if there is a next target, we want to do some stuff. And if there's not a next target, that means it's the end of the task because they've gone through all of them. So if there is a next target, we want to go to the target collection and get the current target index. First, we want to increment it, grab the index, and then is active equals true. And then on target exit, we want to say if as previous target then we want to take the target collection and grab the previous target and set it to inactive. So when we enter, we increment and set the next one, and then when we exit, we just turn off the previous one. Now when we start, we want to, let's just say 0 is active is true, and then we're going to start the whole session. Over in Unity, testing it out, we've got 1, and then we exit and it's done. So 2 works. To test the exiting, if we go to 3 and then exit and then try to go back, doesn't count as any closer because once we exit, we're saying that we're on the path towards the next one. And with this design, we can iterate through all the targets, and once we hit the last target, which right now is 13, we will not do anything, which we need to change to set up to recording some data in the future. I'm just going through the whole set of targets to ensure that this is working. In a traditional fits task, you'll normally have some sort of input button, but since we're using tilt controls, we don't have an input button. So it would look more like going over to 1 and then pressing space once you get lined up. The last thing I'm going to do is adjust the materials we're using on the different components. This is strictly for personal preference. So I'm looking at the platform in the inspector, and I can go to the cylinder and look up the pattern and then just change it until we get somewhere that we like. I like the smoother pattern. So that's pattern 26. I'm going to go over to the platform prefab and go over to the material and then change it to 26. Something that I do want to do right now is add a cube to the scene, and then we're going to center it, and then move the Y. Let's start with -15, and then we'll make the X scale 15 and the Z scale 15. 5. See where that looks. To see how much more we have to adjust it, we're giving background so people have a little bit more sense of perspective. So let's make it huge. Try it again. And then if we bring it down, yeah. So we'll put it at -8. And we'll just call this floor. And then we'll add a texture to it. And see how that looks. So this gives us a little more perspective on the movement of the platform. Not really happy with any of the materials for it. 37. We have these targets. I'm going to, okay, so their material's changing with code. I think that's it.